Hi guys, this is Dr. Meade and we're going to do cellular respiration part 1. I think there's 4 parts to this. It's a pretty complex chapter, so we're going to take it a piece at a time so that it all makes sense. So first we're going to be talking about the beginning of chapter 9, about the kinds of reactions involved, and then we'll move on more specifically to the process of cellular respiration after that. Alright, so what's the point of cellular respiration? You should probably know by now. The point is to make ATP, and this of course happens in mitochondria. Okay, we have to eat to take in the fuels to make ATP, which will then be used to help us build biomolecules and grow and move and live. So the energy is stored in the organic molecules that we consume, the carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Heterotrophs, which we are of course, eat these organic molecules, food. And we digest the organic molecules to get raw materials for synthesis. So we take a big polymer, we break it down into its monomers, and then we can build the monomers together for the parts that make up us. We also digest organic molecules to get energy. And getting energy from food, we're talking about a controlled release of energy. Okay, it's a step-by-step enzyme-controlled reaction, because you don't want to just have an explosion of ATP all at once. It needs to be sort of managed so that the ATP can be utilized properly and so that the food can be broken down. Just to remind you about the vocab here, heterotroph is what we are. You have to consume other beings in order to live. If you are an autotroph, you'd be like a plant and you could make your own food. So we're heterotrophs, we've got to eat other beings, and we are not an autotroph, which is a plant which can feed itself. That's the easy stuff, right? Okay. Okay, harvesting stored energy. Let's talk about glucose. Okay, the catabolism of glucose to produce ATP, the core reaction. Right, you probably had to memorize this reaction back when you were in 9th grade biology. If you haven't memorized it, you should spend some time with it because it's going to get a lot more complex from here. So we're talking about glucose in the presence of oxygen. Oxygen is required for cellular respiration, releasing energy, some water, and carbon dioxide. So there's an old definition of respiration you probably think of taking in oxygen and letting go of carbon dioxide. Well, that happens at the cellular level here in the mitochondria. And here it is written out. Okay, so glucose, and keeping it balanced, we're talking about 6 molecules of oxygen will yield ATP, and 6 molecules of water, and 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, and some heat energy given off. So combustion is making a lot of heat energy by burning fuels in one step. So combustion is going to consume fuel all in one step, using oxygen, right? Fire, right? There's where the heat component. And respiration is going to be making ATP and some heat by burning fuels in a whole bunch of small steps. So going from sugar to ATP and some heat is going to take us a whole bunch of steps. And of course this is an oxygen dependent process. Not all the parts, but to go from start to finish requires oxygen. And enzymes, lots of them. so that we get a lot of ATP. We use a little ATP in there too. And so there's the difference between combustion, burning all at once, one step, respiration, many steps. So how do we harvest the energy from fuels? We're digesting large molecules into smaller ones. And if you're going to follow along, this is when we're going to start talking about oxidation and reduction, which is in your book on page 161. All right. So when we digest large molecules, we're breaking the bonds and moving the electrons from one molecule to another. So it's going to be a lot of talk about moving electrons around. As electrons move, they carry their energy with them. And then that energy can be stored in another bond and released as heat or harvested to make ATP. So we're talking about taking large molecules, digesting them into smaller ones, and when we do that, we're breaking bonds. And when we break bonds, we're going to move electrons from one place to another. Okay? So here we have an illustration of that. Okay? So here we're going to, this yellow one is going to be losing an electron. Okay? So that the blue one will gain an electron. Okay. And okay, so then the one that has lost the electron has become more positive and is called oxidized, and the one that has become more negative and has gained the electron is called reduced. So this is the oxidation and reduction, which is called redox. Right, they're called oxidation reactions because it reflects the fact that in biology, oxygen, which attracts electrons strongly, is the most common electron acceptor. So that's why it's called oxidation, because oxygen is the most common electron acceptor. Oxidation and reduction reactions always occur together, so we call them redox reactions because they're happening together. As electrons move from one atom to another, they move further away from the nucleus of the atom and therefore at a higher potential energy state. So when an electron moves from yellow to blue here, this electron is going to be sitting further away from the nucleus of an atom and have more potential energy, like being at the top of a staircase. The reduced form of a molecule over here has a higher level of energy than an oxidized form of the molecule. The ability to store energy in molecules by transferring electrons to them is called reducing power and is a basic property of living systems. So this basic drawing here is probably a great way to remember the difference between oxidation and reduction. So I would recommend that you guys pause here and copy this one down if you haven't already printed out the PowerPoint. But I think this is a great, easy way to remember that the yellow loses the electron and is oxidized, the blue gains an electron and is reduced. All right, moving electrons around. How do we move electrons in biology? Moving electrons in living systems. Okay, electrons can't just move all by themselves. They move as a part of the hydrogen atom. So when you move a hydrogen, you move electrons. So energy is transferred from one molecule to another via these redox reactions. So if we're talking about cellular respiration, this formula here, okay, the glucose has been oxidized fully. Each of the carbons has been cleaved off, and all of the hydrogens have been stripped off and transferred to oxygen. So the most electronegative atom in living systems we just talked about is oxygen. Okay, so this converts oxygen into water as it is reduced. So if we take a look here, there it is. Okay, this part is the oxidation part of the reaction. So remember that the oxidation is when we're losing electrons, and so all of these hydrogens are leaving. Right, and here is the reduction part of the reaction. And when we reduce, okay, like up in here, it's gaining the electrons, and so this molecule is going to be gaining the hydrogens. And remember that oxygen wants to take whatever extra, oxygen's the most electronegative atom, and it's going to receive those extra electrons. Right, so taking glucose into carbon dioxide is the oxidation part, and transforming the oxygen into water, that's the reduction part. So what are we moving around? We're moving around these hydrogens, so that in the oxidation part the hydrogens are leaving, in the reduction part the hydrogens are being added over here. Hopefully this makes some sense. I think, like I said, if you really spend some time kind of putting these two pictures together, I think that will really help, because this yellow and blue thing is kind of the key thing to sort of memorizing what happens, that the yellow is losing the electrons, the blue is gaining. And when you lose electrons, you become more positive, and that's oxidation. When you gain electrons, you become more negative, right? We're adding on the hydrogens here, and that is reduction. Oh, sorry, boing, there throws in the hydrogens, which are where our electrons are being carried along. Excuse me. Coupling, oxidation, and reduction. Redox reactions and respiration. So what we were just talking about, let's go into a little more detail here. The release of energy as breakdown organic molecules. So we're breaking the carbon-carbon bonds. We're stripping off electrons from carbon-hydrogen bonds by removing the hydrogen atoms. So when we go from glucose to carbon dioxide, the fuel has been oxidized, okay? And electrons are attracted to more electronegative atoms. And what did we just say the most electronegative atom was? Right, that oxygen. So oxygen becomes the water, and oxygen has been reduced. So we're coupling the redox reaction and use the released energy to synthesize ATP. Good? Okay. Okay, so let's summarize this. Oxidation, okay, adding oxygen. Reduction, removing oxygen. Okay, oxidation, removing hydrogen. Reduction, adding hydrogen. Oxidation is a loss of electrons. Reduction is a gain of electrons. Oxidation is a release of energy, and reduction is a storage of energy. So which one is going to be exergonic and which one is going to be endergonic? Do, 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 do. Well, okay, so this oxidation is exergonic and reduction is endergonic. because exergonic, remember, means releasing energy, and endergonic means storing energy. This is a great summary of the whole thing, okay? So I would pause and copy this down if you haven't printed out the PowerPoint. This is a key piece to remember this. All right, so moving electrons in respiration. All right, how is this happening? Electron carriers move the electrons by shuttling the hydrogens around. Okay, I'm sorry, I had to pause there, so I'm not sure exactly where I left off, but we're going to talk about a couple of the key electron carriers that move electrons around. And so the major one we're going to talk about, okay, is NAD+, which becomes NADH when reduced, and FAD plus 2 that becomes FADH2. All right, so NAD+, this is a picture very similar to what's on page 163, just so you can look at the structure. It's a nucleic acid, and it's nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. So, and that's its structure. It's two nucleotides joined together at their phosphates groups that are there in yellow, and nicotinamide is the nitrogenous base, although not one that we're used to talking about in DNA or RNA. The enzymatic transfer of 2 electrons and 1 proton, an H+, from an organic molecule in food to NAD+, reduces NAD+ to NADH. And the second proton, the other H+, is released. So that's what we're going to look at right here. So here's the sugars, and here's the nicotinamide, and the reason we're talking about vitamin B3 here is that nicotinamide is known as vitamin B3, niacin, which is majorly responsible for energy production because it has a role in becoming NAD. Okay, so the vitamin B3 is the nicotinamide part. And that vitamin's important in energy metabolism, obviously, because it's involved in moving electrons around. Okay, so you build this one molecule, and then you get to use it in a bunch of different ways. So here, okay, with a hydrogen, okay, go through reduction, and then there it goes, and now it's NADH, okay? So that's the reduction reaction that converts NAD+ into NADH. So it is carrying electrons as a reduced molecule. So the whole function of the NAD is to carry electrons around. And it's really important in photosynthesis as well. You'll see. Oink, oink. All right, so it's like a little piggy bank, okay, because it's got all this reducing power. All right, just as a side note, if you are trying to have more energy, think about consuming vitamin B3. B3 is a vitamin that's abundant in meat and peanuts and sunflower seeds, and nicotinamide is the biologically active form of niacin, okay, known as nicotinic acid. FAD, which we don't have pictured here, is vitamin B2. It's riboflavin, and that's found in organ meats, like liver and kidneys and hearts, and some plants, like almonds and mushrooms, some of the grains, and green leafy vegetables. FAD is a coenzyme critical for the metabolism of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. So we'll probably be talking about that one again. So again, this is the electron carriers moving electrons around so that we can complete those reactions. Okay, so just to show you the back and forth there, of course, that the opposite is the oxidation, right? So here we're adding this hydrogen on here, and here it is removed. Alright, so now putting that into perspective, we'll start going through parts of cellular respiration. There are 4 major metabolic stages of cellular respiration. Okay, oopsie. Alright, the first part is anaerobic. Anaerobic means that it does not require oxygen, and that first part is called glycolysis. And you've probably picked up by now that glyco means sugar and lysis means cut. So we're cutting sugar. And we're going to go through the parts in great detail, so don't worry about that. This is to give you the overview. Alright, so this is respiration, the part done without oxygen. We don't need oxygen for this part. And it's done in the cytosol of the cell. Then the aerobic respiration, okay, is the respiration that does require oxygen, and that occurs in the mitochondria. And so then those parts are pyruvate oxidation, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. And you don't need to copy this down. We're going to go over it in major detail in the next couple videos. But that's to give you an overview of where we're headed. Okay, and what's the point of all this? To make ATP. It's very complicated, but we're going to get there. Oh, I think there's 2 more slides left. This was in the last video, but just to remind you of our friend, the ATP synthase enzyme, which sits in the membrane, where hydrogen ions flow through it, going from high concentration to low. Okay, it's part of converting bonding phosphate to ADP to make ATP. So remember, we're going back and forth between being ADP and ATP always wants to ditch that phosphate, and then the ADP will pick it up again. So we're ending up with the hydrogen ion gradient, and the hydrogen ions to flow down the concentration gradient through the ATP synthase so that we can complete that reaction of converting ADP back into ATP. Alright, so that's the end of cellular respiration part 1, which is the first 5 pages of chapter 9, just to try to simplify it for you so that you don't kill yourself trying to understand all those details. So hopefully that was helpful.